The smartphone and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. They have greatly increased connectivity for those of us in advanced countries, but they have destabilized society, made life unfulfilling, have subjected human beings to indignities, have led to widespread psychological suffering, and the third world to physical suffering as well, and have inflicted severe damage on the natural world. In the first 2 episodes of this series, I have focused on certain destructive groups and elements of society that are not only problematic, but really a form of evil. And while these groups have always been around, the addition of the smartphone into the mix has infinitely complicated things. I've heard people describe heroin and meth as demons, as things that go beyond being mere inanimate objects to things that have serious power over someone's life, that can only lead down the road to hell. This perfectly describes the effects of the smartphone as well. What is the common thread in this scenario? Let's say a kid gets a smartphone for Christmas and then immediately has access to the internet, and eventually hears the endless propaganda about LGBTQ+. And they can immediately pull up Reddit with people sharing their experiences as members of that group. They can immediately pull up porn of any one of those groups. They can immediately find info on how to transition. They can immediately find a doctor's office to help facilitate their transition. They can immediately find advice from people who tell them what to do and how to go around their parents, and they are put into an echo chamber and a bubble that insulates them from reality and sanity. And once they go to the doctor's office to start the transition, who's the doctor? What role did the internet and the smartphone play in their decision to be this kind of doctor? Who believes in it so much they're willing to work as someone who facilitates this level of degeneracy? The phone is the root cause of all of this. Of course, the phone itself isn't the problem. It's the infinite roads to smut it provides to anyone who owns one. Think of the marriages destroyed by sites like Ashley Madison. Think of the way dating has been destroyed by Tinder. Think of the huge amounts of CP distributed through platforms like Facebook's Messenger and Gmail. Think of all the ways you can be propagandized to. Think of all the privacy we've lost. We went from worrying about the government listening to our conversations to saying things like, "Hey, government spy, set a timer for my cookies for 3 minutes." And that last example perfectly illustrates how all this has formed. Every advance was supposed to make our lives easier and more convenient, but in less than 15 years, we've collectively lost our national identity, our cohesiveness, and our sanity. That part was never advertised to us, because, of course, we had no idea the extent of the Pandora's box we were opening. A SpongeBob episode comes to mind, the episode from Season 1, where SpongeBob and Patrick learn about hooks. At first, the hooks are just purely a fun thing. There's no danger in it at all. What's the danger? You get on, you go up, and you jump off, and float back down to the bottom. In their naivete and childishness, they can't even see the potential danger of the hooks. Mr. Krabs tries to warn them of the dangers, but the hooks are more than just hooks. They represent fun, they represent rebellion, they represent independence. But at the end of the day, the most dangerous thing about the hooks is that they are addictive. SpongeBob knows the dangers of the hooks now, and he really does want to stop. But the definition of an addict is someone who continues to use the drug in the face of growing consequences. If you've ever known an addict, they'll continue using despite losing their license, losing their wife, losing their kids, their house, their job, their car, their dignity. And so SpongeBob chooses the hook. And it happens to be a horrible mistake. You see, the smartphone was the bait. The convenience was the bait. But the destruction of our countries is the hook. The destruction of our children is the hook. The abilities of governments to whip up the masses from one thing to another on a dime is the hook. COVID showed us that. Would you have even known there was a pandemic if your smartphone hadn't told you? The erasure of history and culture was the hook. Mass censorship is the hook. Y'all get what I'm talking about here, right? Even just the addictiveness of the phone itself is a hook. regardless of whatever the content is on the screen. Everything we're seeing crumble around us is the damn hook. Think about the past episodes of this series. Think of all the people who were in those and all the ones who were on the LGBT spectrum. Now put those people in the year, 1626. Would they be exactly the same as what they are now? Absolutely not. Would they be infected with the same mind viruses they got from the internet? Of course not. I think about this a lot, actually. Every time I see one of these freaks running around, I think, what would you have been if you were as old as your grandma? And most certainly, they wouldn't be what they are today. Hell, they weren't even the same things in 2006. That's how fast all of this has went down the slippery slope. Think of every idiot you went to high school with. Odds are they've got an opinion on Ukraine right now. Now, why is that? 300 years ago, they would have just been, John the farmer, whose main concerns were his family, his farm, his town, and maybe on the upper levels, his country, and immediate threats from neighboring countries. What does that John think about Ukraine? He doesn't know anything about Ukraine because he's never heard of it. But now, in 2022, John has been turned into an anxious little moron who's constantly checking his phone for updates on the Ukraine situation. He's listening to propaganda to educate himself so that he can educate others. He gets enraged when he hears an opposing opinion and he starts furiously typing out a novel to explain how wrong this other guy is and how he, John, in 2022 is such a good person. A rush of dopamine hits his brain when he sees the likes rolling in on his comment. John is so smart. Oh, it feels so good. John checks his phone 150 times a day to see if people are still liking what he said. This is what John and everyone in our society has been turned into now. And even though we know that phones are bad, and even though we know companies are selling our data, and even though we know the algorithms are reading our minds to increase consumption, and even though we know the government uses them to spy on us, even though we know it's all led to cultural and societal rot, we still use them. And that's why the smartphone goes in the devil category. Let's think back to Academic Agent's Positive Vision video, wherein he gives the hypothetical town of Trumpton. In that video, he specifically bans smartphones, and indeed, most modern electronic media of any kind, because it's so obvious on its face that phones are part of the major mediums through which degeneracy is spread, and that any serious solutions for the future involve not having them in the picture. Just remember that the Amish checked out pretty quickly into this whole technology thing. And they seem to be doing okay. How many suicides do they have? How many murders? Or gays? Or trans kids? Or weebs? Or furries? Any of it. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Maybe they're onto something. Anyways, that's all the time I have for today. If you enjoyed this video and type of content I'm making, consider giving this video a like and maybe subscribing. I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.